Our next speaker, I can't say enough about him. This is John Anderson, Otter River Muskie Factory Guide, speaker at the 2019 Odyssey, part of every big fish discussion you'll ever have. There's nobody who is more dedicated and fish obsessed than John Anderson. And what I love about John Anderson is he takes an empirical, scientific, analytical mind to the fishing game, because he understands it's a weapon, and it translates into fish, and that's why he's such a renowned guide. I'm looking forward to fishing with him myself. He's been a fishing guide since probably about 8 to 10 years before I was born, and that's not saying that I'm young, that's saying something else. No, he's awesome, and the symposium had to begin somewhere. And one of the first people I talked to was John, and he no hesitation, saw the value, understood the what our community could do, and was willing to work with me 100%. There was a lot of hours that have gone on in the background of the symposium, by not just myself, by other people. Weekly, sometimes twice a week, we're meeting and trying to organize things. John's also very connected on the research level, as you well know. Both to specialized anglers in different fishing communities and to the researchers themselves. He's helped me find direction, and I won't say too much more in case I interfere with his presentation. But I do want to say this, and I don't care if it doubles up and says it again, because you need to hear it. At the 2019 Odyssey, when John Anderson was standing before us speaking, I'd been awake for 38 hours by that stage, and I won't lie, I'd been struggling because I wanted all the information that people were giving us, Jocelyn and the other speakers and Brent Bocek and them. Despite fatigue, when John started to talk, I sat upright as if I was in trouble in school, and the words that came out of his mouth they ingrained in me and changed me. And the biggest thing he said, and the most influential to me, was he's like, when you're up there fishing for muskie on any given day, you're going to have 2, maybe 3 chances at a fish. Are you going to be ready? And then he went on to explain what that would mean. But when I go fishing to this day, when I start my day before my first cast, I say those words to myself. Today I'm going to get 2, maybe 3 chances. Unless I'm fishing with Pete Hoffman, we tend to do better than that. I'm going to get 2, maybe 3 chances at a muskie today. Am I going to be ready? And that centers me, keeps me focused, and I am grateful to him. So without further ado, John Anderson, I'd love to hear what you have to say today.
Good morning. A morning seminar for a change. Happy to be here, Danny. Thanks a lot. Congrats to you and the whole team on this event on so many levels. When you called me right away and when you called me and told me what you were doing, it was so easy to say yes right away, because it's for such a good cause and with such good people. So thanks so much for having me. Hopefully I have a few good words for today, and I'm just realizing I have a light to turn on. Give me one moment.
John Anderson likes to fish in the evening more so than the morning, so it's a nice sacrifice on his part to get here at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning. So thanks, John.
Muskies are the sleep in late and catch more fish. It's absolutely true, and I'll tell you why, based on some research that was done on the RIDEAU River. I'll tell you where I'm going to go today with my presentation. Lisa's going to jump in at 45 minutes, and if you know me, I always talk right past 45 minutes, and so I'm going to get going on this, and Lisa's going to run my slides in the background. So my presentation today is called Learning to Catch More Muskies Through Research. You are only as good as your fishery. That's a quote from Gord Pizer, and that's at the core of this. Doesn't matter how good you are, if you don't have a good number of fish in the fishery you're in, or you don't have big fish, you're not going to catch lots, and you're not going to catch big ones. And they don't end up in there by accident. It's a result of research and a direct result of management. And so where we're going to go today Quickly, we're going to learn to catch more muskies through muskie research. I'm going to look at 6 or 7 different prominent research projects, what learning we took out of it. I'm going to talk to you about the St. Lawrence River. It's the biggest issue in the muskie world right now. It's the elephant that's not in the room at this symposium that should be. I'm going to talk to you about patterning muskies, a quick how-to on patterning muskies. Gord Pizer says it's the easiest fish of all fish to pattern, and he's right. And so we'll tell you how to put those pieces together. Look at the future of muskies, pressure, technology, and research. And so let's get on from there. Because I talk too much and I always run past my time, it's important to get my thank yous out of the way at the start. So Danny Colley, the Muskie Trader team, the Muskie Trader community. This event is revolutionary. I think it's the dawning of a new age. COVID's taken a lot away from all of us in all walks of life. But if you look for silver linings in life, and one neat thing that's come out of COVID is the muskie community got together online for the Muskies Canada, the Muskies Canada Odyssey. There's been thousands and thousands of hours of people watching, 20 incredible hours of content by 50 people. This group here, 4,300 strong, and raising huge money, significant monies, you know, to support the fish that we love. So what we discovered out of COVID is, you know, muskie's always been a niche market, a really small market, a fish that gets ignored for research and for funding and by the MNR a lot in favor of more popular fish. But, you know, we're not a niche market anymore. There's a lot of us. That's what this is showing. And, you know, that's what people coming together in Muskie Trader have shown, and we're willing to support our fishery. We really care about it. We're passionate about it. We can raise money for it. We can raise awareness. We can educate ourselves. And so I look at this as the start of a new era. And so let's ride this wave. I need to say thanks to Lisa Goodyear, producer of this project. She does so much for the Ottawa River Muskie Factory as a guide, for Muskie Factory baits, and for me personally. So thanks for all you do and dedicating way more of your time again, Lisa, to another great muskie cause. The presenters that you have today, we reached out to 5 different people involved, groups involved in muskie research, and it's a tough time of year for academics. It's exam time. My wife is marking exams out of her yin yang right now. So it's amazing that Stephen Cook and his team stepped up right away to be here. And so we have Stephen, Dr. Stephen Cook, Dr. Sean Landsman, who you just saw, researcher Jordana Bergman, part of the team that is responsible for more muskie research than any other group in North America. It starts in Ottawa. They have projects there on the RIDEAU, on the Ottawa, on the St. Lawrence. And Stephen's keyword yesterday in his presentation was partnership. Research costs a lot of money. It takes partners. It takes partners who raise money, like the Muskie Trader Group. It takes organization. All the projects I'm going to talk to you about today have Muskies Canada money on it and Muskies Canada organization behind it. And I know there's some animus in this group over Muskies Canada. You know, mostly that's people who have animus with people in the past, because you can't knock Muskies Canada for its values and as an organization and for what it does. There's no group that contributes more to research. There's no group that organizes and drives more research. And so whatever you think of Muskies Canada, if you want to support muskie management and muskie research, you need to support Muskies Canada. You need to work with them. And there's a whole bunch of us who dream that Muskies Canada and Muskie Trader will be working together shortly, together to raise money and work on causes. So again, more optimism coming out of this. Doug Wagner, you're going to love his presentation. When you watch it, consider that Doug is catching giant muskies in an amazing fishery. Doug's fishery is built on the genetic stock Georgian Bay muskies. It was a collapsed fishery and a rebuilt fishery, and that's something pretty neat. So he's going to give you a great lesson on electronics. Mike Parker. Few people do more than Mike Parker in the muskie world. The bait maker community in general. Mike Parker, LIDEAU behind the scenes from Blue Water, Dave Cormanos, Sean Mahar. These are the guys who are always giving their baits to raise money for good causes all through the year, and they raise so much money. I'm proud to be part of them. Mike Parker's just another one of those. He's going to tell you about the Lake St. Clair telemetry project, and Brent Bocek you saw yesterday. So all those people for stepping up. Muskie research benefits the fish and the fishery, and it benefits the angler, because what we get from learning about the fish and how to take better care of the fish and the environment where the fish is we get behavioral knowledge, and that lets us hunt. And so being in Ottawa, I've learned so much from being around the researchers and being involved in the research. That's what I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about today. Research is also very future oriented. We're learning behavior now to protect and manage the species in the future. That's important. When you're young, all you think about is catching the hell out of muskies. You go to where they have the most muskies, you go to where they have the biggest muskies, and you catch them and you fish for them. But after you've done that for a few years, you start to realize that, that fishery isn't there by an accident. And these fish only live for 30 years. And things can, you get a little older and things can turn around very quickly, as they have in a number of fisheries. In terms of change, protecting, it's us. It's man who drives the change, and it's man who manages the fishery. The very direct link between those two. It's man who commercially fished all the muskies out of Lake Simcoe, and then it's man who put over $1 million into trying to rebuild that stock. And whether it's been rebuilt or not, it's still out. But what we learned is, if you destroy a fishery, it's way, way harder and way more expensive to rebuild it than it is to manage it and look after it. We're the ones who dug canals around all the rapids on the St. Lawrence and filled them with zebra mussels and gobies. And nobody knew that would be the consequences, but the muskies are paying a severe price for that. And so, that's another bad thing that we need to learn to protect the muskies from. There's good things that come too. The Ottawa River is one of the greatest fisheries on the planet because of 13 dams and incredibly stable water levels. And those stable water levels, we've learned, allow muskies to spawn successfully every year. And stable water is a key to maintaining spawning grounds and maintaining recruitment. And so we have constant recruitment. We have good recruitment every year in the Ottawa River. And so, learning to manage those water levels and manage the conditions in the spring, that's so important. I talked about Doug's fishery. It's built on stocking 25,000 muskies a year. Now they're stocking 10,000 muskies a year. So we'll see what happens there. Our fisheries, we don't do that. Our fisheries are all natural reproduction. It depends on how many muskies we have and how successful they are at spawning, and again, that comes back to us looking after them. So you are only as good as your fishery. Some questions to consider as we go through this project today. I got to say first, I live in a world of positivity. If you know me, I seek out positive people and positive energy. So if I go to a negative place on some of these things today, I look at them objectively. They just are. It's the situation. It's the situation that we have. I am an optimist, and I see good. So if I point out some things that are not good that are going on, it's not negativity, it just is, and we need to address it, and we have the power to do that as a group. So first question is, when was, or when is, or when will be the peak of the muskie population in Canada? In the States, they stock muskies into more and more states. And the more muskies you stock, the more muskies you get. And if your muskies die and disappear, you just stock more muskies. And so, not worried about them and their muskie fishery. I'm worried about us and our musky fishery, because ours is the one that is only maintained through constant recruitment and natural reproduction. So when was the peak of musky fishing? When was the peak of our musky population? How many times can you catch a muskie? Annually? How many times can you catch it in 1 year? How many times can you catch it during its lifetime? How many times can you catch it until you change its behavior or it dies? And that's because there is a mortality rate associated with catching fish. You know, that's why we preach proper handling, and we preach fishing techniques that are beneficial to the fish's survival and its ability to continually propagate, you know, and reproduce. So how many times can you catch it? That'll come up later in the conversation. What are other angling communities doing to protect their apex predators? If you watched Stephen Cook talk yesterday, God, that was such a good presentation, Stephen, on so many levels. But he looked at apex predators around the world, and the apex predator populations everywhere. Doesn't matter whether it's mammals, whether it's fish, whether it's reptiles. The apex predators are disappearing at a tremendous rate all over the world. But look at our muskies here in Canada. We have a non-dense population. We are the capital of the muskie world, and we have more water. And so, you know, our apex predator population is still very strong. But based on what's happened everywhere else, it causes you to look ahead. The muskie community was the first group ever to preach catch and release. It goes back to Muskies Incorporated and Muskies Canada in the late 1960s and 1970s, because our fish live to 30 years and they're rare and they're apex predators, and you need to manage and look after the apex predator everywhere. So are we still leading 50 years later? You know, we've done a bunch of research, we've upped our game, but if you look at other communities and what they're doing now, in BC, single hook and barbless. In Alberta, single hook and barbless. If you're fishing pike in the Northwest Territories, single hook and barbless. If you're fishing in Florida, you can't go out on a boat to fish without a release tool in your boat so that you can release your fish in the water. These are what other angling communities are doing to look after their apex predators as their populations diminish. Do we need to up our game? Do we have more pressure coming? Do we have more handling coming? We do. And so I'll submit to you that we do need to up our game. Let's talk about studies and learning as an angler from the studies. Different studies that have taken place. If you've seen my presentations, I talked about a little bit of this at the Muskie Odyssey. Don't worry, I'm going to go to a whole bunch of different places on it. The Bernard LEBEAU study, first muskie telemetry study ever done in Canada. Wabigoon and Seoul, Dr. Bernard LEBEAU, Larry Ramsell published it. For me, this was a game changer in my life. It was following fish around. It wasn't anglers telling you what they thought the fish were doing. This was real data. This was people following fish and observing behavior. And this stuck with me as the most real data that you can possibly get. And in an age where getting source data is more and more key, this is grassroots. And so I'll tell you about several telemetry studies and what came from them. The home range theory. This is huge in muskie fishing. There were two home ranges in this study, a summer home range that the fish were very loyal to and lived on every day, and a secondary home range that they hunted off of. And some of the secondary home ranges were 20 and 25 miles, and the fish would swim these once or even twice a day. Just remarkable, groundbreaking stuff, because these fish were swimming patterns. They were patternable right from the first telemetry study. I mean, they always came back to their primary home range, to their summer home range. So all summer they were there. When you're hunting this fish, that's huge information. They're in the same place every summer, every year, whether you see them or not. Okay, store that data. Okay, that's important as a hunter. It had facts like fish were never in shallow on a cloud. Big fish were never in shallow on a cloudy day. You know, I lived by that when I was young. It's not true. Absolutely not true. But, you know, it was in this case from the science. and there were good reasons behind it. So first study that taught us about patterns, muskie being a fish of patterns. Let's go to our next study, the 1994 telemetry study on the Ottawa River. Groundbreaking. Transmitters in fish flew over them with planes, pinged their locations to find spawning grounds. Again, you need to protect spawning grounds. You need fish to spawn successfully. It's the basis of our fisheries. So we found spawning grounds. We also got to see the fish movements after spawning season and through the year. And so from this, we learned a bunch of different core principles in muskies. One, that muskies, different muskies live at different depths. After fish spawn, some of the muskies disappeared for the rest of the year. Everybody comes in shallow to meet, and then they disperse and they go through a pattern. They recuperate near where they spawn. Males different than females. I'll talk about that on future research in a few minutes. But it's definitely a pattern. And then they travel to their home ranges. And some of them travel short distances, and some of them travel 35 kilometers. But they do this pattern every year, there and back, because they're loyal to their spawning grounds. Okay, the seasonal movement patterns, predictable routes, a predictable spawning location, a predictable home range, and a predictable time when the fish are going to travel back and forth between those two. So again, patterning muskies, and home range fidelity. Again, cementing what was found in the LEBEAU study, home range fidelity. These fish were really loyal to their territory in the summer. Their home range ideally has everything they need. It has place to shelter, places for them to be comfortable, and it has lots of food close by. And typically it has access to deep water, especially for a lot of the biggest fish. In most systems, your biggest fish always have an affinity for deep water. So that's something that you can take away as a hunter, is concentrating on the deeper areas. Some personal learning for me out of this study. I show this, I know you guys have seen this in my presentations, but you got to take this information to the bank if you're a hunter of muskies. This is my childhood fishing partner, Eddie Lalone, founder of River Rats Baits. And that's a fish that was tagged in the 94 telemetry study. And you can see a transmitter hanging down out of the anus of that fish, or next to the anus of that fish. The fish was transmitted in 94. Here it is in 2000 on July 3rd. This fish was 100 feet from where it was pinged on July 3rd in 1994. It was 47.5 inches when the transmitter was placed in it. It was 50.5 inches 6 years later. Our big fish grow at a rate of 1/2 an inch a year. So that pattern, that annual pattern, take that to the bank. Whether you see your fish or not, your fish are following that pattern. So, you know, a good spot one year is a good spot the next year. The fish are there, the fish are around. They may have learned to avoid you because you're not good for them, and fish learn through avoidance. That's a whole other conversation to have, and I don't want to get beat up by the biologists right now, but that annual pattern is a huge deal for us musky fishermen. When you're not seeing fish, wonder if I put this in the related to Project Noble Beast. I'm going to go one slide ahead if we could. No. All right. When you're not seeing fish, it's a little bit out of place, but when you're not seeing fish, it's a big part of musky fishing. And so Sean just told us from Project Noble Beast that one of the mainstays in that study, one of the main behavioral mainstays of that study was no matter what the conditions, no matter what the time of year, no matter what the temperature, no matter what's going on, there were always fish on or near the good weed structures. You can take that to the bank. So something that came out of Project Noble Beast, and I'll get back to that more in a few minutes. When you're not catching fish, when you're not seeing fish, where are they? They're on the bottom or they're in the weeds. And guaranteed, they're in the weeds. And if you're not seeing them, it's because you're not appealing to them. You're not throwing something that is appealing enough for them to move on. Or in Stephen Cook's formula yesterday, very simply, you're not casting your lure close enough to the fish to catch the fish. And so taking what you can from research about when you're not catching fish and looking at behavior. When you're not catching fish and activity is low, they're on the bottom or they're in the weeds. And you are fishing the wrong way for them. You need to address that small strike zone. Let's go ahead at one more slide, Lisa. Thank you. Another study that we did on the Ottawa River, lamprey eels. These are silver lampreys. They lived for 7 years in the bottom of the Ottawa River. And there was this phenomenal riddle in the 90s, going back 25 and 30 years, because you could only find these on fish over 4 feet long. And so the Muskies Canada chapter got together and fished all year to catch 15, to catch 15 of these that we could bring back and give alive, that we could hand in live to be analyzed. And what we learned from this study was simple, but a lot of the things that you take for granted that now about musky behavior, we didn't know back then. And the answer from why the 4-foot fish had these is bottom fidelity. Your big fish are spending more time on the bottom than your small fish. And that's really important to understand as a big fish hunter. If you're hunting big fish, you probably want to be fishing near the bottom a lot more. And I'll go back to Ryan Pickering's Kitchener-Waterloo chapter where he had 5 phenomenal trollers on a panel. And every one of those guys talked about trolling on the bottom, bumping their baits into the bottom, crashing into the rocks on the bottom. And that was a key to all of them who were all successful big fish hunters. So bottom fidelity, really important in understanding musky behavior. And then let's take that a step further. Your big fish spend more time on or near the bottom than smaller fish. And then there's predictable times when your muskies are going to be on the bottom. When your barometer is extremely high, when your barometer is extremely low, post-frontal times, low activity times for muskie. We'll talk about those. All of those are telling you that your muskie are on the bottom, that you're inactive. And so, one of the great juxtapositions in muskie fishing, we fish really fast for this fish. We throw blades, we troll at 5 and 6 miles an hour, and a lot of the time they're laying down. They're less active. They're less prone to travel. So key information learning. Usually pull up the Canadian record fish, the Ken O'Brien fish, because it's a great example of a fish that lived on the bottom, filled with catfish, caught by a walleye angler on the bottom. This is Pete Bowman holding a 58-inch muskie. Pete's a bass guy. He's got a great muskie resume, but he's a bass guy. He's using a bass technique with modified muskie gear and modified muskie presentation and fishing on the bottom, doing something that we don't do very much as muskie anglers. And they actually caught a 56 and a 58 back-to-back on the bottom in a half an hour. It's the 2 greatest catches ever, but the key again is big fish and how much time they spend on the bottom. Okay, let's go to Project Noble Beast, the next study in the sequence that I jumped ahead on a few minutes later. Key learning in that study, again, 2/3 of the time that Sean and the team looked for muskies, they were on or near the bottom, inactive. 2/3 of the time. Where are you fishing in the water column all day? One of the reasons I fish shallow is because I'm always fishing near the bottom. Think about that. Okay, there's muskies that live shallow all year. There's muskies that live deep all year. There's muskies that live in between. The ones that are out deep, it's hard to put a bait near them. you know, that takes a tactician, that takes a great troller, that takes a whole lot more finesse. But if you're fishing in shallow, your bait is still near the fish that are on the bottom. And so I make a living off of the information that came out of Project Noble Beast because I'm a shallow water fisherman. Okay. For me, that's always been the most fun. It's the most visual experience. We get the most follows. We see our fish. You see a whole lot of other things going on in the shallows, you know, and if you're going to be not catching fish for a lot of the day, that's a good way to spend time not catching fish, and you get more feedback, I think, to try to figure the puzzle out. So, you know, the learning out of Project Noble Beast, the on the bottom, the weeds, and then the other key piece of learning out of this, key, late in the year, the biggest muskie in the study and other muskies were in shallow water, a foot and a half, 2 feet, 3 feet of water in late November. You know, because I spent a whole decade before that trolling plows and great big lures out in deep water. You know, it's not fun. You know, if I could, as long as my hands have some circulation, I would rather throw baits and bring a fish in on a and turn it around in a circle. You know, that's the greatest 45 seconds that you can have catch the fish or not in freshwater fishing. So learning that the fish are in shallow and that you can go and hunt them, and then figuring out where they are in shallow, it just opened up a whole other piece of the puzzle. You know, thanks to telemetry work that came out of a study that was designed to teach us anglers how much stress we put on the fish through our angling efforts. So Project Noble Beast, in my mind, the greatest study in the modern day that connects looking after the fish, what we do as anglers with the fish, and then the behavioral elements out of it. One of the really neat aspects that came out of the study was the recapture rate. Now, I don't think this was ever formally calculated, but I think Sean did. I was still writing this presentation when Sean was talking this morning, so I didn't catch. I think it's 43 fish in the study on the Ottawa, maybe 5, maybe 6 recaptures. And that's really interesting because we knew where the fish were. People knew where they were. People fished for them. People were all, you know, they were in community spots, a lot of those fish. And there were only a handful of fish that were caught twice in the study. And one of the fish, the 48.5-inch female, was caught 3 times on the same color double blade bait. Okay. And fish have personalities. You know, there are dumb people and there are smart people, and there are dumb fish and there are smart fish. Fish that are dumb eat baits readily. Mike Lazarus told me we never had follows in the old days. They'd never seen baits. They didn't want to follow it in and chase it around the boat. They just crushed it. Chasing baits in and learning to chase them in a circle and eat them at the side of the boat, that's fish learning avoidance. Not complete avoidance, but it's them learning caution, and catching these fish changes their behavior. The bass community will tell you, the guys who study bass at Queen's University, Bruce Tufts and those people, the bass's feeding habits actually change when they get caught enough. And so that's a real neat area of study. The biggest fish in this study was recaptured 3 years in a row, once a year for 3 years. So, you know, I personally look at every fish, with the exception of the smaller males. Smaller males are dumb, and testosterone makes men or males stupid, makes us aggressive, makes us fight, makes us dumber, makes us vulnerable, and it does in the muskie population too. The male muskies just lose it and just make mistakes, just throw caution to the wind, and so they're the ones that get caught more. They're the ones that I see out on the river these days, that I catch that fish and go, oh, this fish was caught 3 weeks ago. I caught a fish last year I know was caught 3 times. I don't remember catching a fish 3 times in the same season before. Small male muskie. And so how many times can you catch a fish? This fish wore the scars of being caught from the first time it was caught, you know? And so that's a question that we have to answer going forward and deal with it on other levels as well. Let's look at our next slide. That Georgian Bay telemetry study, ARUNAS LISKAUSKAS, amazing researcher. Georgian Bay, a different area, a huge area. So the territories that the fish were covering with their transmitters and the telemetry work were much bigger. The routes weren't as religious, I don't think, as on the Ottawa River, but the key information that came out of that for me and for managing muskies was spawning site fidelity. Christian Zimmer, one of the two muskie boys, he was working on this study, and he told me a story about how they were in an area looking at where fish with particular tags spawn, fish with tags spawned, and ARUNAS told him that tomorrow, because the temperature was changing, and everything in the fish world happens on temperature. The temperature was changing to the right temperature, and ARUNAS said tomorrow fish XXX is going to come right here, not in the bay, right here. And that fish showed up the next day. And so spawning site fidelity through research, not just an area, not just a bay, but a specific site. How important is that site to the survival of muskies? How important is protecting that site? How important is making sure the water levels, I mean, you think about Georgian Bay water levels going up and down. You know, if a muskie likes to spawn in 4 feet of water on a favorite spot, or slightly deeper water, pike actually prefer a little spawn on a little shallower than muskie. If the water's 6 or 8 feet different than normal than the years before, what happens? If it stays low for several years and you dry out the weeds beds where that are hereditary spawning sites, that are generational spawning sites, what happens? You know, this is all research in progress. This is why we need so much more research to learn to look after our muskies. Another thing that came out of that study was the recovery of muskies post-spawn. The males stay around the spawning areas a lot longer. The females come in and out of the spawning of their spawning beds, and they leave earlier, and they tend to go recuperate in deeper water. So as a hunter, what does that tell you? If you want to hunt a big fish in the opening weeks of the season, probably it's not in the spawning bed. Probably fishing in the spawning bed isn't it. Probably, depending on the water temperature and where in the spawn the fish were when your season started, those big fish are a little further out, a little off of the spawning area, somewhere not too far away, but deeper water. And in the cases on Georgian Bay, they were around docks, a lot of docks, with people and boats and activity, interestingly. So another piece of the puzzle. Let's look at RIDEAU River transponder study. This was just a few years ago. And this goes back to Stephen Cook and work that he pioneered, starting with bonefish in the Bahamas, putting transmitters in fish and having a field of transponders. And so in a section of the RIDEAU, not far from the core of the city, the Cook team gathered 250,000 points of data movement based on fish with transmitters swimming into transponder zones. And then you can pattern the behavior. What time of day did it happen? And if you want to, and you know, and again, it's resources and analysis and how deep do you want to go. And we didn't get to go there. You could tie this to moon cycles. You could tie it to weather now. But when this was done, you know, it was time of day. And so maximum movement, sunset. Minimum movement, morning. That's why this is the sleep in later and catch more fish. And I believe from Sean's graphs, activity generally increased from morning through the day to peak at sunset and just post sunset, and then decreased again through the evening in a cycle to come around to morning. You know, that was something a lot of us knew. It's not a secret that sunset is the golden hour, the greatest peak of them all. But, you know, this is research. This is research driving it home, you know, and validating what anglers already know. And some of the latest telemetry work that you're going to hear Mike Parker talk about. One fish changed what we thought we knew about patternable fish. In the St. Clair study, there was a fish that I believe I believe, went out of Clair down the Detroit River into Erie, did some huge crossings and covered hundreds of kilometers on Erie and repeated the pattern a second year. Wow. It tells us what we don't know about managing this fish and ensuring this fish's future. You know, there's a lot we know. There's an awful lot more we don't know. And we have to find out to look after it and look after the future of this fish. If I had a learning do-over, if I was young and I was starting out and I was seeking musky knowledge, when I was young, musky knowledge was really hard to come by. It came from really eccentric people who spent all their time, real characters who spent all their time chasing muskies and were willing to teach or pass it on. It came from Muskie Hunter magazine. It came from sitting around a circle with all the other eccentrics at Muskies Canada meetings. And so learning is so different today. But if I was starting over, I would have documented all of my muskie trips in great detail. Okay. Data allows for patterning. Remember, muskies are more patternable than any other fish. And so the way you build a pattern is you accumulate data and then you look for similarities, you look for patterns, and they jump out at you. It's amazing after you put all the data together, how much sometimes it just jumps in your face. But until you put the data together, you don't see it. So I would build a data bank. I would have kept detailed logs on dates, water temperatures, on not just the fish I catch, on sightings and contacts. I would have kept detailed information on donuts, on not catching fish, because not catching fish is what we do. And we're creatures of habit, so we repeat what we do. And so trying to not repeat what you did when you didn't catch fish in the same conditions last year or 5 years ago, you know, give me some help, because I'm a creature of habit. You know, and so that's the kind of things that your logs show you. Water conditions, including the height of water and the clarity of water, weather, you know, barometer, sky, wind, precipitation, depth of the fish. How deep was it? What was its proximity to the bottom? What were the moon phase? All of these things are things that with modern equipment and ability to collect data, you can accumulate and you can build your own patterns. So how do you build a log? How do you keep logs? I got to say, again, I got to give a plug to Muskies Canada as the driver of muskie management in Canada. There is no bigger source for driving muskie management than the Muskies Canada log program. It's approaching 50,000 logs of information of muskie trips, of catching and not catching fish, of size, of health of fish, of observations of the fish, of disease on the fish. And what this data does is allow us to accumulate a catch per unit effort for fish. And that data goes to the Ministry of Natural Resources every year, and it encourages them to raise size limits. Why do we not have a 54-inch size limit everywhere in the muskie world? It seems like an obvious question to all of us. That's something we should lobby for. That's something we should all push for as a group, especially now that there's more of us. But you can't imagine behind the scenes how hard it is to convince people to make a 54-inch size limit. And so there's a group in Muskies Canada led by Andy Pappas, who's working to raise the 54-inch size limit more around the French River area and the smaller bodies of water all around there, because it's a process that comes from log data. You need to have log data to convince politicians and to convince the Ministry of Natural Resources to act. And so the log data that you accumulate through the Muskies Canada log program drives Muskies Canada management. And now, in the new day, in the new age, with the revamped log program, your personal data is shared. Some of your personal data, like not your individual trip data, not your individual statistics, but your group's data statistics are shared. So you can see which lakes are most productive in the Kawartha Lakes. You can see which lake in the Kawartha Lake is having a higher catch per unit effort every year and needs attention. You can you can learn as an angler. There's no better way to contribute to the fishery, and no better place to store your trip data than in the log program in Muskies Canada. Regardless of what you think of Muskies Canada or what you thought about them in the past, if for some reason you're a hater, you can't argue with what this program does. You can't argue with its influence on the resource that we all love. And I strongly recommend to the young anglers, join this club, start keeping your logs. They'll be there forever. They'll help enhance the fishery that you love forever. They'll help you catch more fish going forward forever. Patterning muskies. Again, you can't pattern muskies unless you have data. They are the easiest fish to pattern. You know, it took Gord Pizer to say that to realize, but you can pattern them on a daily basis. You can pattern them seasonally, and you can pattern them annually. I wanted to talk more, but I'm gonna talk about seasonal and annual patterning and what you get out of logs. So this is some advanced stuff. If you go to the next photo, Lisa. Okay, this is a fish that started the pop study that Stephen Cook undertook, the soda pop study on the St. Lawrence River with pike, to see if we can find a new tool to help release muskies. Now, the study didn't prove that what the study proved was that cutting a chunk out of a gill in a fish is a severe injury, and applying pop to it doesn't help it. Imitating hook injuries in fish is a very difficult thing. This study was narrow in context, and you can't tell people that the pop study is a good thing for fish, you know, but research is about trying and exploring and looking for that road. And there is something there with soda pop, because this fish, I've held thousands of fish. I've watched more fish die than I want to tell you about, and it disturbs me. I can still see so many of them, and this fish would have died in my hands. If you go watch the video on it, it would have died in my hands, but applying pop to it stopped the bleeding, and it allowed the fish to swim away, and the fish wouldn't have swam away without it. And so Gord Pizer, in discussing the disappointing results to us as anglers coming out of the study, the results are what they are. But Gord said to me the same thing. He said, you know, John, I've seen it with my own eyes, and there is something there. The study didn't bring it out. That's for a next generation study down the road to pick up, and I'm not going to go there. But on behavior and annual patterning, on the day that this fish was caught, I was fishing with Charlie Ray, and half an hour before this 54-inch fish came into our boat, I watched a fish that was just a hair bigger than this fish swim 30 feet and eat my bait and just nip on the back of the bait. And I fought it, and it came off, but I had a good look at it. I know it was slightly bigger. I know the fish that I hooked wasn't a resident fish on that spot. I know it was a fish that came to that spot because I live on that spot. I live on my spots every day. I have for decades, all up and down the river. I know the fish that live in and around them, and a fish that's 54 is so rare, and they're so special. And so the sister fish to this fish, I hooked and lost, but those fish came at a particular temperature in the fall. That's when they showed up. And so if you go to the next picture, Lisa, this past year, this is Glenn Cameron from Shimano, national president for Muskies Canada. Amazing guy. Glenn caught the fish. I'm going to tell you, I swear to God, Glenn caught the fish that I lost fishing with Charlie on the same spot with the same cast at the same water temperature, because this fish follows that pattern and it showed up. So in summer home ranges, you know your fish are where they are in the summer, whether you see them or not. And those patterns in the fall are driven by temperature. Okay. And so for me, the fish movements, everything happens based on temperature. And that's why I said if I had a do-over, I'd start looking at temperatures. There are optimal times when you catch more fish. The most fish are caught in a specific temperature range in the spring and a specific temperature range in the fall. Okay, and if you or part of the Muskies Canada log program, you'd know what that most productive time is. And it's because fish move to new areas and they're vulnerable. They're not familiar. And they show up in different places, and it is predictable. And that's how you catch fish like this. So that's what patterning has helped me do. If you go to the next fish, this is that same thing. This is Jay Cressman. That is an Ottawa River fish. If you look at that pattern, it is a unique Ottawa River pattern. That's a fish that shows up in a specific place, in a specific time in the fall, at a specific temperature. We call them virgins. They show up in a pack. They don't have a mark on them. They don't have a broken fin. They are a unique color pattern that we don't see the rest of the year. So I will surmise as an angler that those fish are a deep water fish that our Muskies Canada first telemetry study showed us in '94. We don't present lures near them because they live deeper than we fish. They live in a place where we don't fish as anglers, but they become vulnerable in the fall on movement, on temperature. And so in terms of patterning fish and building data to manage this fishery better, to look after this fish better, and to help you catch more fish as an angler, log your day, log your fishing trips, build your own logs, build that data, and catch more fish going forward. I had some other things to talk about, but as usual, amazingly, I filled my whole 45 minutes without getting to the end of my slides. I just got to say thank you again to this group and to this community. The Muskie community has more passion than any community that I've belonged to in my life. They care more about the fish and more about the fishery, and they do more to look after it than any other fishing group I know. Proud to be part of it. Thanks for having me here today. You can reach me at Ottawa River MuskieFactory.com. You can reach me at MuskieFactoryBaits.com. And the research thing is so big to us and to all the bait makers. We give $2 from every bait that we sell at Muskie Factory Baits to support muskie research. And we're going to have enough money in the kitty this fall to drive another program in conjunction with Muskies Canada, maybe Muskies Trader, and a whole bunch of other great partners. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. I hope everyone sitting at home has got the same look of awe on their face that I feel right now. John, I just have a question. Is any fish scheduled to be where we're going to be on October 20th? I just want to be prepared mentally for that. Is there a specific spot that's all lined up ready for me on that date, or are we going to have to find them the old-fashioned way?
Well, you know, Danny, I'm old, and I'll tell you, I've lived a good life, and I've killed a lot of gray cells, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I've kept logs. And so what I'm going to do is go to my logs for that whole time period around where we are. I'm going to look at the date, and I'm going to look at the temperatures, and you know what, Danny? October 20th is a good time to be there. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we'll have a good story for next year.
One other thing that John alluded to but didn't necessarily articulate is those logs that are done in Muskies Canada, they're not sealed. They're readily available as far as I know. So if you get your membership and you have access to their site, you can go on and review everybody else's. And if you want to talk about shortening your learning curve, that's the best way to do it, especially if you're newer to the game. Go in there and read other patterns. You'll know what lake people are on. I don't think it gives the exact spot or anything. That'd be dreamy. But you'll see which fish, where they were, things like that. There's a ton of information there, and you can shorten your own curve. So great to be a contributor to that, but also great to know that if you join and become a member, I'm almost dead certain you can go back and review 50,000 logs of where fish are caught and when they're caught and what lures are working and things like that. So it's a resource and it's one you can contribute to and extract from, as far as I know. And they have a website, I guess if you search muskiescanada.org, I believe, or something along those lines, you can join. I think it's a $60 a year membership. You get, you get a lot out of that, though. There's an online magazine that comes to you, and the meetings are incredible. The people you will meet, the baits you have access to just by being, because the bait builders tend to be there as well, and your connections are second to none. So there's a ton of information to be had with Muskies Canada membership. I'm going to get to some more draws here. John, you're a star, and thank you very much for your passion, your knowledge, and for sharing.
Pleasure, Danny. Thanks for
Okay.
what you're doing. All the best, guys.
Cindy.